It was February 20th, 1942. A day that began like any other aboard the USS Lexington, but would soon turn into one of the most desperate moments of the Pacific War. The carrier was moving through the Coral Sea, its crew tense, alert, and painfully aware that Japanese reconnaissance planes were searching for them. The ship's air group had been on edge 4 days, knowing that, if the enemy found them first, the consequences could be catastrophic. For Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare, this morning was routine, or at least it was supposed to be. A quick patrol, a systems check, a flight that would normally fade into the long list of uneventful missions every pilot performed between battles. But the Pacific had a habit of turning routine into chaos with terrifying speed. As O'Hare and his wingman climbed into the sky, the call came across the radio. A sharp, urgent voice that instantly changed the tone of the day. Enemy bombers inbound, large formation, closing fast. The Japanese had found the Lexington. And they weren't sending scouts, they were sending killers. A squadron of Mitsubishi G-4 Betty bombers. Fast, long range, engineered for one purpose: to deliver torpedoes straight into the hulls of American carriers. If even a few of them broke through, the Lexington could be crippled or sunk. A single successful strike might change the entire course of the campaign. The order went out: all available fighters, return and intercept. But there was a problem, a mistake, a twist of fate that no one could have predicted. O'Hare's fighter group was scattered across the sky. Some were too far out on patrol, others too low on fuel. A few were already returning to the carrier, still miles away from the incoming threat. By sheer chance, only one pilot was in the right place, at the right time, to intercept the bombers before they reached the fleet. Butch O'Hare, alone, high above the ocean, he looked down at the horizon. A faint dark line forming in the distance, growing larger with every second. 9 enemy bombers, all heading straight toward the Lexington. O'Hare knew exactly what that meant. He knew what would happen if he didn't act. He knew the carrier behind him wasn't just a ship. It was thousands of lives, the heart of his task force, the symbol of American resistance in the Pacific. And now, its fate rested on one F-4F Wildcat. In the cockpit, he adjusted his throttle, checked his ammunition, tightened his grip on the controls. There was no time to wait, no time to gather reinforcements, no time to think about the odds. The bombers were coming, he was alone, and the Lexington was depending on him. With a single breath, Butch O'Hare pushed the nose of his Wildcat down and dove straight toward the approaching formation, into a fight no pilot was ever meant to face alone. The dive ended with a jolt. O'Hare leveled out, alone in the wide Pacific sky, closing the distance between himself and the incoming threat. But in those few seconds, as the bombers grew from distant spakes into the unmistakable silhouettes of enemy aircraft, a single truth settled in: no one else was coming. The radio confirmed it, fragmented voices, broken by static, every message carrying the same grim reality. The rest of the fighter group was too far out, too scattered, too late. It was just him, one Wildcat, one pilot, facing an entire formation of bombers, built to destroy the ship behind him. And yet, there was no hesitation. Not in Butch O'Hare, not on this day. He took a breath, deep and steady, the way he'd been trained to do. Ever since Naval Flight School, he remembered the harsh instructors, the endless drills, the constant warnings that someday, somewhere, every pilot would face a moment when skill alone wasn't enough, when courage had to fill the gap. This was that moment. Below him, the ocean stretched endlessly, a blue void broken only by the thin white wake of the Lexington far behind. Somewhere on that deck, thousands of sailors were going about their duties, most unaware of the danger racing toward them. Their lives, their ship, their survival. All of it rested on the decisions O'Hare would make in the next few minutes. He tightened his harness, shifted in his seat, checked his ammunition counters again. Every bullet mattered now. The Japanese formation drew closer. 9 bombers, flying tight, their engines humming in perfect, disciplined unison. They had no idea that only one fighter stood between them and their target. O'Hare throttled forward, feeling the Wildcat strain. It surged ahead. The vibrations of the engine ran through the frame of the aircraft, and into his bones. He had never felt more alone, or more focused. There was no backup plan, no second wave of defenders. If he failed, the Lexington would suffer the consequences. If he succeeded, no one would ever forget what happened here. He angled his Wildcat toward the sun, using the glare as cover, a classic tactic, one his instructors had hammered into him, again and again. Strike from where the enemy isn't looking, hit fast, hit hard, disappear. He could see them clearly now, the green noses of the Betty bombers, the long, thin wings, the torpedoes slung beneath their bellies, deadly, determined, coming straight for his ship. O'Hare steadied his breathing. This was it, one pilot, against a mission designed to overwhelm an entire carrier group. He pressed the trigger lightly, a quick test burst. The guns roared to life, 6 streams of fire slicing into the empty sky. Everything was ready, everything depended on him. With a final push of the throttle, Butch O'Hare committed fully, diving into the heart of the bomber formation. A lone defender charging into impossible odds. The Japanese bombers were almost within range, their engines droning, wings glinting in the morning sun. O'Hare leveled his Wildcat, the wind whipping past his helmet, the ocean far below a patchwork of blue and silver. He was one pilot against 9, each bomber loaded with deadly torpedoes, each one trained to strike a carrier dead. He closed the distance, calculating angles, speed, and timing in a heartbeat. There was no room for hesitation. Each second lost could mean the difference between life and death. He aimed for the lead aircraft, knowing that, if he could disrupt their formation, he might buy precious time for the Lexington. The Wildcat surged forward. Tracers flared from his 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, tracing fiery arcs through the morning sky. The lead bomber shuddered as rounds tore through its left engine. Flames erupted. Smoke poured back along the fuselage, and the formation wavered, breaking its tight, disciplined V-chaos spread like wildfire. The Japanese pilots struggled to maintain position, suddenly vulnerable to a fighter they hadn't even noticed until now. O'Hare didn't pause. He rolled his Wildcat, coming in from a different angle. The second bomber was already veering to avoid collision. He opened fire again. Rounds tore through its right wing and fuselage. The aircraft listed, its tail section trailing smoke. Another bomber was forced wide, veering dangerously close to its companions. Each calculated burst of fire increased the chaos. Each maneuver bought seconds for the carrier below. 9 bombers, 1 Wildcat. 5 confirmed kills. Every shot counted. Every movement could be the last. The Japanese gunners fired back, tracers converging on his cockpit. He banked sharply, climbing, diving, weaving, dodging streams of deadly fire with a skill born of instinct and training. The sky became a battlefield of steel, fire, and smoke. The sound of engines, guns, and wind merged into a deafening roar. O'Hare was entirely alone. The odds were against him, but he moved like a shadow, unpredictable, relentless. The bombers were now scattered, their formation collapsing under relentless pressure. Some tried to turn back, confused and disoriented. Others struggled to regain altitude, their engines smoldering from hits. The attack had bought time. The torpedo planes would not reach the Lexington in time. The carrier was still intact, its deck unscathed, its crew unaware how close they had come to disaster. O'Hare's mind was razor sharp. He scanned the skies, ammunition counters ticking down, only a few hundred rounds left. He had to make each one count. Precision was everything. One mistake, one missed shot, and the bombers would regain formation, their attack run unstoppable. The Wildcat danced through the cloudless sky, spinning, diving, firing. An almost impossible display of aerial acrobatics and determination. He became a phantom, a single force of disruption, turning a hopeless scenario into a miraculous defense. For every bomber he hit, the Lexington owed him a debt of survival. For every evasive maneuver he executed, he carved seconds into eternity, seconds that meant life for hundreds of sailors below. And then it happened. The first torpedo bomber fell from the sky, flames ripping through its fuselage. The others wavered, breaking formation entirely, the mission that had seemed inevitable. A strike that could have crippled the Lexington was unraveling before the eyes of a single pilot. One Wildcat, 9 bombers, impossible odds. But O'Hara's skill, courage, and sheer willpower were rewriting history. In real time, above the vast, indifferent Pacific, O'Hara's ammunition counter blinked warning red. Only a few hundred rounds remained. The Wildcat's 6 guns had sung their deadly song, but the sky still held enemies, still held danger. The bombers were wavering, disoriented, but one miscalculated move, and the Lexington could still pay the price. He adjusted his throttle, feeling the F4F respond under his hands. The wind roared past the canopy, the ocean far below a shifting silver mirror. The Japanese pilots were trying to regroup, their formation faltering, but not yet destroyed. Each bomber that O'Hare could disable was one less chance for disaster to strike the carrier. He dove again, firing carefully, counting every burst. The lead bomber's engine erupted in flame, sending black smoke curling into the sky. Its wingman veered to avoid collision, a cascade of chaos spreading through the formation. The remaining aircraft tried to adjust, but O'Hara's attacks had sown confusion that they could not recover from. The Wildcat shook under the force of repeated maneuvers. O'Hare felt sweat stinging his eyes as he scanned 4 targets and threats at once. Another bomber appeared, closing fast, its guns trained on him. He rolled the aircraft sharply, the canopy rattling with the stress, and fired a precise burst that struck the enemy's fuselage. Flames blossomed. Another bomber lost. He had destroyed 5 aircraft that could have turned the morning into a catastrophe for the Lexington. But he was not finished. Every second mattered. The surviving bombers were desperate to escape, and still capable of launching a devastating strike. His heart pounded. He knew the limits of his Wildcat, its engines straining, its guns nearing empty. His mind locked onto the target. This was the point where skill and courage intersected, where a pilot became more than a man flying a plane. He became the shield 400s below. The Japanese formation was fragmented. The pilots panicked, their disciplined attack reduced to chaos. O'Hare pressed on, choosing targets with surgical precision, each burst of fire finding its mark in engines, wings, and fuselages. Smoke and flames trailed across the Pacific sky, a fiery warning to any who dared continue the attack. Finally, after minutes that felt like hours, the last bomber broke off. The formation scattered into the horizon, heading away from the Lexington, their torpedoes useless, their threat neutralized. The carrier was safe, for now. O'Hare climbed to regain altitude, blood pounding, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. The Wildcat was battered, its engines smoking, its guns empty. Every lever, every control had been pushed to the limit. Yet he was alive, and so was the ship behind him. The enormity of what he had accomplished began to settle in. Alone, he had faced a formation of deadly enemy bombers, outnumbered, outgunned, yet unbroken. He had turned near certain disaster into one of the most heroic moments in naval aviation history. The Pacific sun glinted off the fuselage of his Wildcat. Smoke trailed behind him like a banner of survival, a testament to skill, courage, and determination. O'Hare knew he had bought time for the Lexington, and in doing so, he had etched his name into history. The sky was calm now, almost deceptively peaceful, as Butch O'Hare leveled his battered Wildcat above the vast Pacific. The enemy was gone. The threat was neutralized. The bombers, their formation destroyed, had fled. Yet the mission was not over, not until he was back on the carrier deck. His hands ached from gripping the controls. His eyes burned from the glare of the sun and the smoke that had filled the cockpit. Every gauge on the Wildcat told a story of strain. The guns empty, engines overworked, airframe battered by battle, yet it was still flying, and it had to. Below, the USS Lexington looked like an island of steel, its deck bustling with sailors who had no idea how close they had come to disaster. O'Hare radioed in, voice tight with exertion, but steady, formation broken. Bombers down or scattered, carrier safe. The crew on deck stopped what they were doing. Eyes scanned the skies, following the lone Wildcat as it circled, making its approach. Smoke trailed from the engine, a jagged reminder of the fight that had just taken place. Every sailor realized, even before they heard the report, that something extraordinary had occurred. O'Hare adjusted his approach. Landing on a carrier was never easy. A small strip of deck, pitching with the waves, requiring precision, timing, and nerve. In his condition, after minutes of intense combat, with engines stressed and controls strained, it was almost impossible. He lined up the Wildcat, heart hammering, as the deck rose to meet him. His wings tipped slightly with the wind, the smoke trailing like a banner of battle. Behind him, the vast Pacific stretched endlessly, reminding him how isolated he truly was. No margin for error. One mistake, and it would all be over. The carrier crew braced. Arresting wires clicked into place. O'Hare throttled back, feeling the Wildcat respond sluggishly, its engine struggling from the exertion of battle. He descended onto the deck with a mix of skill and instinct, each foot of forward motion a delicate negotiation between physics, aircraft, and human will. The wheels touched down, the tail hook caught the wire. The aircraft skidded, sparks flying from metal on steel, then ground to a halt. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of hydraulics and the roar of the wind. O'Hare unclipped his harness, legs trembling from tension and adrenaline, and stepped onto the deck. Crewmen rushed to him, eyes wide, faces pale but awed. They surrounded the Wildcat, examining the smoke-streaked fuselage, the scorched wings, the charred engine cowling. Some stared at the pilot himself, a young lieutenant who had single-handedly prevented catastrophe. Word of his actions spread instantly. Officers, sailors, and aviators alike realized the magnitude of what had happened. One man, one Wildcat, against 9 enemy bombers, each carrying the potential to cripple the Lexington or sink it outright. O'Hare stood quietly amidst the commotion, his mind still racing through the battle. Victory had been bought by skill, courage, and determination. But it had been earned in silence, without glory, without fanfare. The danger had passed, but the legend of Butch O'Hare was just beginning. The Lexington had survived, its air group intact, its sailors unharmed. And somewhere in the endless blue of the Pacific, a young pilot had etched his name into history. The adrenaline was finally fading. O'Hare leaned against the side of his Wildcat, hands trembling, mind still replaying every maneuver, every burst of fire, every decision that had kept him alive and saved the Lexington. Around him, crewmen moved like shadows, checking the aircraft, assessing the damage, murmuring in disbelief. Every glance told the same story. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, leading the air group from the bridge, approached O'Hare with measured steps. He had heard the radio transmissions, felt the tension in the control tower, watched the lone Wildcat dive and climb, vanish and reappear, as if guided by some preternatural instinct. Now, seeing Butch standing before him, covered in sweat and streaked with soot, he realized the enormity of the feat. "You saved the ship," McCampbell said quietly. Not a question, not a greeting, a statement that carried weight. O'Hare nodded, trying to absorb the enormity himself. It was difficult. For all the training, all the hours in the air, no one could have prepared him for the stark reality of facing 9 enemy bombers alone. No one could teach the instinct it took to survive against impossible odds. The other pilots gathered, their eyes wide, voices low. Some shook his hand. Some simply stared, silent, understanding the unspoken bond of those who had faced death in the sky. The Wildcat, still smoking from the exertion of battle, was a testament to the skill and courage of its pilots. Each dent, each scorch mark told a story. Each spoke louder than any words ever could. Orders were transmitted to headquarters, reports filed. Radio messages relayed the outcome. 1 pilot, 5 enemy bombers destroyed, Lexington unharmed. The reaction was immediate. From Admiralty to deck crew, disbelief mingled with awe. A single pilot had changed the course of a mission, had turned what could have been disaster into a story that would travel fast, whispered from ship to ship, from base to base across the Pacific. O'Hare's personal emotions were mixed. Relief, certainly. Exhaustion, overwhelmingly. But also a deep sense of responsibility. This was not a victory he had claimed for himself. It was a shield for hundreds of sailors who had trusted the air above them to remain safe. He had survived. The Lexington had survived. And yet, the weight of what might have happened, if he had failed, pressed heavily on his shoulders. The Naval Command acted quickly. Reports of the engagement reached Admiral Ernest King, who recognized the significance immediately. Butch O'Hare's bravery, initiative, and sheer skill could not go unnoticed. Decorations would follow. Medals, citations, a legacy cemented not in theory, but in reality. In the lives saved and the courage displayed under fire. In the hangar, crewmen cleaned the decks. Pilots recounted the tale in whispers, each embellishment unnecessary. The truth was more incredible than any story they could spin. The Wildcat's guns had sung, the sky had been torn with tracer fire, and O'Hare had emerged unscathed, a lone guardian of the Lexington. But for Butch, the moment was quiet, almost personal. He leaned on the wing, eyes scanning the horizon, thinking of the men below, of the danger avoided, and of the daunting realization. In war, courage often came wrapped in solitude, and heroism often wore the face of one man flying alone. News of Butch O'Hare's daring action spread quickly through the Pacific theater. From the bridge of the Lexington to naval bases thousands of miles away, every pilot, sailor, and officer spoke of the young lieutenants who had faced 9 enemy bombers alone and emerged victorious. The Navy wasted no time. O'Hare was recommended for the Medal of Honor, the highest recognition for valor in action. Every report emphasized not only the destruction of 5 enemy aircraft, but the fact that the Lexington, a cornerstone of the Pacific Fleet, had been spared without a single casualty. His courage had preserved not just a ship, but hundreds of lives and critical naval operations. The strategic impact of his action was profound. Japanese forces had planned the raid to cripple the carrier, to deny the United States its air superiority in the Pacific. A successful strike could have shifted the balance, even temporarily, giving the enemy a deadly advantage. O'Hare's intervention, however, shattered the mission's precision, dispersed the bombers, and prevented a single torpedo from hitting its mark. One pilot, flying alone, had altered the course of a battle before it even began. On board the Lexington, morale soared. Pilots who had witnessed the engagement felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that skill and bravery could overcome impossible odds. Sailors on the deck, watching the lone Wildcat smoke trail, shared a collective pride, a sense that they were part of something extraordinary. Stories of O'Hare's heroism became teaching tools, used to inspire new pilots and reinforce the ethos of courage and initiative. In Washington, newspapers heralded the feat. Headlines declared, "O'Hare, one-man Air Force, saves carrier." Young men dreaming of flight read the account, imagining themselves in his cockpit, facing danger with resolve, precision, and unyielding courage. For the American public, O'Hare became a symbol of the bravery that would define the war in the Pacific. Yet O'Hare himself remained remarkably grounded. He downplayed the heroism, crediting his training, his aircraft, and perhaps a bit of luck. To him, it was simply a matter of duty, the duty to protect the men and ships under his watch. And while medals and accolades followed, the true reward was knowing the Lexington and her crew had survived an attack that could have been catastrophic. Within the squadron, his example became a benchmark. Tactics were revised to emphasize initiative and aggression, showing that even a single fighter could make a decisive impact. The psychological effect on Japanese pilots was also significant. Word spread among enemy airmen of the Wildcat that had disrupted an entire formation, instilling caution and perhaps a measure of fear in future encounters. For Butch O'Hare, the mission was just one of many he would fly, but it became the defining moment of his early career. His name was immortalized not merely through medals, but through the legacy of courage, ingenuity, and the unwavering commitment to protect his comrades and the fleet. From that day forward, the tale of the lone Wildcat and the young pilot who faced 9 bombers alone would echo across carrier decks, airfields, and classrooms, a testament to what one man could achieve in the crucible of combat. O'Hare had not only saved a ship, he had shown the world that valor and determination could rewrite the rules of battle. Butch O'Hare's heroics over the Pacific did more than save the Lexington. They transformed him into a rising legend in naval aviation. After that first audacious mission, he was no longer just a young lieutenant. He was a symbol of courage, skill, and the American fighting spirit. His next deployments put him in the thick of action almost immediately. Every encounter in the skies around the Solomons and the Coral Sea tested him further. Japanese Zeros, now wary of the ghost of the Lexington, began to recognize the Wildcat that had once struck down 5 in one mission. O'Hare's tactics evolved, combining aggressive strikes with calculated evasions, using his knowledge of enemy strengths and weaknesses to maximize effectiveness while minimizing risk to himself and his men. In the months following his legendary flight, O'Hare achieved a status. Each confirmed kill added to his reputation, but his influence went beyond the scoreboard. Younger pilots emulated his daring maneuvers, his willingness to attack against overwhelming odds, and his unflinching focus on protecting the fleet. Training sessions began to incorporate his real-world strategies, turning individual heroics into lessons for entire squadrons. The Navy also recognized the importance of O'Hare's story for morale. Promotional material and newspapers highlighted his achievements, showcasing the effectiveness of skill, courage, and quick thinking in battle. For the public, Butch O'Hare became a face of hope and determination. Proof that even in a brutal war across the vast Pacific, one individual could make a decisive difference. Yet O'Hare remained grounded, disciplined, and intensely focused. He did not seek fame, and he understood the peril inherent in every mission. Every flight was a reminder that heroism carried responsibility. One misstep could cost lives, not just his own, but the sailors and airmen depending on him. The pressure did not diminish his daring, it refined it. Each encounter honed his instincts, each victory strengthened his resolve. Beyond air combat, O'Hare contributed strategically. He advised commanders on air patrol patterns, attack formations, and the best ways to defend carriers against enemy raids. His insight, born of first-hand experience, proved invaluable. Squadrons under his guidance learned to anticipate enemy moves, to strike decisively, and to protect ships in ways that textbooks alone could never teach. His legend grew not only among Americans, but also among Japanese pilots. Reports of a single Wildcat wreaking havoc on bomber formations circulated in enemy circles, breeding caution and respect. The psychological effect of O'Hara's actions was as real as the physical victories he achieved. One man's audacity had shifted the balance of engagements, turning fear and uncertainty into a powerful tactical advantage. By the end of 1942, Butch O'Hare was more than a hero of a single day. He had become an enduring symbol of what a skilled and determined aviator could accomplish, a figure whose name inspired both fear and admiration, and whose actions would echo through the corridors of naval aviation history. The Wildcat, though considered inferior to the Japanese Zero in speed and agility, was transformed into an instrument of legend in the hands of its fearless pilot. As the Pacific War continued, the story of Butch O'Hare reminded everyone, from deck crew to admiral, from young pilots to seasoned veterans, that courage, intelligence, and determination could redefine the outcome of a battle, and that a single man in a single aircraft could, against all odds, change history. By 1943, Butch O'Hare had become a seasoned veteran, his reputation preceding him across the Pacific. Every mission carried weight, every sortie a test of skill, courage, and endurance. Enemy pilots knew his name. His presence alone could alter the course of an engagement. Yet heroism in the skies came with a cost. Each encounter risked life and limb. The Japanese Zero remained a deadly adversary, fast, agile, and unforgiving in the hands of an experienced pilot. O'Hare understood that no amount of fame could shield him from the dangers that hung in every sunlit patch of ocean, every cloud shadow that could conceal an ambush. His squadron moved from carrier to carrier, from the Solomons to the Gilbert Islands, participating in strikes that pushed the Japanese back across the Pacific. O'Hara's leadership extended beyond combat. He mentored younger pilots, drilled them in evasive maneuvers, and emphasized the importance of discipline, situational awareness, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. During one mission, O'Hare led a flight to intercept an incoming formation of enemy fighters. The skies erupted with tracers and explosions. Every maneuver was precise, every decision critical. He took calculated risks, diving and climbing, chasing targets while shielding the carriers below. By the end of the engagement, several enemy aircraft were down, but the cost was evident. Some of his wingmen returned with damage, and the memory of those lost lingered in his thoughts. Even with the adrenaline and victories, O'Hare remained acutely aware of mortality. He knew that heroism did not guarantee survival. Flying at the edge of danger was a daily reality. Mechanical failures, miscalculations, or enemy fire could end the life instantly. And yet, the call of duty, the responsibility to protect his fellow sailors, propelled him forward, mission after mission, sortie after sortie. His courage inspired those around him, deck crews, fellow pilots, and even enemy pilots, recognized the exceptional nature of his skill and determination, but it was a lonely path. Few could understand the constant tension, the mental strain of calculating odds against deadly opponents, while maintaining focus on protecting the fleet. Tragically, the Pacific War claimed many heroes, and O'Hare would face his own final mission on November 26, 1943. While leading a routine patrol off the coast of the Gilbert Islands, he engaged enemy aircraft in a ferocious dogfight. Details remain murky, but the encounter ended abruptly. His aircraft was lost, and the Navy reported him missing in action. The death of Butch O'Hare shocked the fleet and the nation. The young pilot who had single-handedly saved the Lexington, who had inspired countless others, was gone, leaving behind a legacy that transcended his time in the air. Though the skies were now quieter, without his daring maneuvers, the impact of his courage endured. O'Hara's story reminded everyone that heroism in war was never without danger, never without sacrifice. Even as he vanished into the vast Pacific, the lessons he imparted, the morale he boosted, and the legend he had created lived on, etched into the hearts of those who flew with him, and into the history of naval aviation forever. The news of Butch O'Hara's disappearance reverberated across the Navy. Deck crews paused in disbelief. Fellow pilots stood silent, eyes fixed on the horizon, grappling with the loss of a man who had become more than a comrade. He was a symbol, a standard-bearer of courage in the skies. Posthumously, O'Hare was awarded the Medal of Honor, recognition not just for his actions over the Lexington, but for the embodiment of the Navy's ideals: bravery, skill, and unyielding dedication to duty. The citation detailed his heroism in precise terms: the 5 Japanese bombers destroyed, the countless lives saved, and the audacity of a single man standing alone against overwhelming odds. But O'Hara's legacy went far beyond medals. He became the namesake of the Navy's first escort carrier, USS O'Hare DD-889, a floating tribute to a man who had defined courage in aerial combat. In classrooms, in training sessions, and in the minds of new aviators, his story served as both inspiration and instruction. Tactics he had pioneered: aggressive engagements, calculated risk, and protecting the fleet above all else, was studied and emulated for generations. The psychological impact of his actions continued to echo. Pilots and sailors knew that one determined individual could tip the balance in battle. O'Hara's feats became legend, retold across carriers and airfields, shared in hushed tones over radio rooms, etched into the collective memory of the Pacific theater. Enemy pilots, aware of his exploits, approached missions with heightened caution, an unintentional testament to his influence beyond his own lifespan. O'Hara's personal story also humanized the war. He was not a mythic figure. He was a young man, barely in his 20s, facing impossible odds, making split-second decisions, and achieving extraordinary results through skill, courage, and instinct. His life reminded everyone that heroism was not born of invulnerability, but of resolve and commitment in the face of mortal danger. Over time, memorials, plaques, and dedications celebrated his memory. Schools and airfields bore his name, ensuring that future generations would understand the significance of one man's actions in shaping history. Historians and veterans alike recounted his missions, emphasizing the principle that training, bravery, and quick thinking could overcome even the most overwhelming threats. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of O'Hara's legacy was the intangible: his spirit, the audacity to fly alone against impossible odds, to protect those under his care at great personal risk, and to do so with unwavering determination, set a standard that would define naval aviation heroism for decades. Decades later, pilots continue to honor his memory in flight. They recall the Wildcat that roared through the skies over the Pacific, the young lieutenant who defied danger, and the lives saved because he refused to back down. Butch O'Hare, a man of courage and skill, transcended his era to become timeless. A symbol of heroism, sacrifice, and the extraordinary impact of one individual in the vast theater of war. And so, his story endures, not just in history books or on plaques, but in every daring maneuver, every act of courage, and every aviator who looks to the sky and remembers what one person can achieve when bravery meets skill.